This right here is a highlighter, and it is probably one of the commonest reasons why people fail their exams. But wait, a highlighter? I thought a highlighter is the very thing that's going to help me pass my exams and remember what I need to learn. But in this video, I'm going to show you why that actually is not the case. And more importantly, I'm going to show you 3 specific memory techniques that are proven time and time again to work and make you a master in learning. But before we get into that, why exactly does this highlighter not actually do what it's supposed to do, help me remember more things? Well, for starters, highlighters are known to create a false sense of comprehension. Apart from making your page a little bit more colorful, it does nothing to actually boost your memory. And secondly, the problem with these highlighters is that we often tend to have a habit of over-highlighting, which then saturates the information going to your brain or saturates what your brain has to remember, making your overall retention much weaker. So it is time to say goodbye to these bad boys and work on something that actually works. So the first of the 3 things that have actually been proven to work is called active recall. Active recall is, as the name suggests, a much more active way of learning. It isn't your run-of-the-mill usual reading session that you're so used to. Active recall is brain gym time. It's when you sit with a new subject and without reading anything or even before you start the subject, you take a moment and you actively try to recall everything that you already know about that subject. Then after that, you go back and actually start reading the chapters, and then you try to actively recall those things again after an hour or 2. This has shown to drastically boost up your retention and your memory of the subject. Because what you're doing now is that you're anchoring what you already know with this new information. And that is one of the key ways that your brain is used to learning new subjects. And once you read through these topics in this particular active way, that's when you can go ahead and start making flashcards and developing questions for yourself and quizzing yourself as you go through the topics. Every right answer is another rep that you are doing for your brain at the brain gym of learning. The more tricky it is at the start, the stronger you will be at the end when you've put the things that you know with the new concepts and information that you need to attach. The second technique is called spaced repetition. Imagine planting a seed in your brain. You water it today and you leave it for the day. Then tomorrow you come back and you water that seed again. Then after 3 or 4 days, you come back again and you water that seed again. By now, slowly but surely, that seed will gradually turn into a plant and eventually into a tree. What I'm actually talking about is the process of repeating what you already have studied, but in a strategic, spaced way. So for example, if you learn new subject matter on a Monday, then go back and revise it on the Tuesday, but then leave that work for about a day or 2, and then come back to it on Friday, and then wait for another week, and then go back to it again the following Friday, maybe then a month later. And this spaced repetition, where initially as you learn the new subject, you repeat the material slowly and quickly after each other, and then later on, you start increasing the gaps between study sessions on that particular topic. This spaced repetition creates a much more concrete and stronger neural connection in your brain so that you will remember the material for the long term. Instead of just trying to cram it for the short term and forgetting it as soon as the exam's done, this spaced repetition method helps your brain consolidate and process this information in the most sustainable and long-lasting way. The third weapon you can use to become a memory master is called interleaving. Interleaving is actually a counterintuitive twist in the plot. We all think that if you study one subject the entire day, you will automatically become a stronger master in that subject. But what we've actually found through studies is that the more variety you bring into your study sessions, the better you will remember those different study sessions in the long term. So basically, it's like turning your study sessions into a little DJ session. You do a little bit of maths, and then a little bit of physics, and then a little bit of biology, or whatever it is that you're studying. Or in biology, you learn multiple systems over a short period of time. The reason why it's proposed to work is because the more you start on new subjects, the more you are driven by your innate natural curiosity on those subjects. And the more curious you are in the beginning stages of every single different subject, the more you're likely to retain that information. So when you're planning your study sessions, don't plan an entire Sunday just to focus on one system. Divide your Sunday into 3 or 4 study sessions, each focusing on a different part of whatever it is that you need to learn. And this process of mixing it up not only gives your brain more reps in tackling a variety of different subjects, it keeps your brain more actively engaged because you are getting to the core of each topic as you're going through the different topics. It is a much more active and engaging way of studying and has been proven to play a much bigger role in developing an understanding of the core concepts of multiple different subjects at the same time. So today, as you are a student and you are learning new subjects, keep these things in mind: active recall, spaced repetition, and interleaving. And I guarantee you that you will revolutionize your study sessions. So now that we understand what the best memory techniques are, what if I told you that you would never want to study just one topic and complete that topic in one study session? That sounds counterintuitive, right? But in the next section, we start to find out why incomplete study sessions are actually a lot more effective. If you clicked on this video, you're probably wondering, wait, why would incomplete studying improve my memory retention? Well, for starters, take this Apple Watch for example. It is obsessed with rings and you closing them. What's that about? It uses this very ring because Apple understands something that you don't. Your brain is obsessed with loops, and every time you open up a loop, your brain wants to close them. For example, when you clicked on this video, you opened up a loop in your brain asking yourself, why would incomplete studying help my memory retention? Now, to help close that loop, let me explain. There's a psychological phenomenon called the zeigarnik effect, where your brain remembers tasks that are incomplete rather than the things that you have already completed. In other words, things that you have not yet completed are automatically kept in your working memory. It is kept at the forefront of your thoughts because your brain hates incomplete tasks. You see, when you do something, you actually open up a loop in your brain. Your brain wants to close that loop at any cost, because your brain is so programmed to always complete the tasks that it is given. If I had to draw a circle right here and complete that circle, and then next to it I had to draw another circle, but then stop before completing it, your brain and your attention is much more likely to go to the incomplete circle. And so in very much the same way, if you leave a task unfinished, your brain will nag you until you get that thing done. And so we can take that same psychological bias and apply it to learning and studying. If you have to study a chapter in a textbook, start by dividing that chapter into multiple different sections. Now begin the first section and study it, but only cover the first 75% of the material in one study session. Then take a short break to give your brain a rest. But then after the break, come back and complete the remaining 25% of that section, and then immediately start the next section in that chapter, but only study it about halfway through. Don't complete the next section. The idea is that once again, as you are nearing towards the end of that subject, stop right there for a break. And basically you just need to keep repeating this, stopping midway or about 75% of the way through every section that you study. Because by doing this, you open up multiple different loops that your brain is craving to close. And this technique leverages the zeigarnik effect to keep your brain engaged and focused on the section that it needs to complete, boosting your memory of the subject in the process. You're basically tricking your brain into constantly seeking endless loops that it needs to close. Because a lot of us sit down and we think that we need to complete the entire chapter in one go. And while that may give us a sense of accomplishment, because your brain has completed that task, it's more likely that that completed task goes to the back of your thoughts, to the back of your focus, and less likely that you are going to remember it. But instead, this art of incomplete studying, where you leave study sections incomplete and then pick up where you left off in the next study session, harnesses the fact that your brain simply will not rest until it releases itself from the tension of an unfinished task. But this video itself would not be complete if you viewed it on its own. In fact, this is a second video of a much larger loop that I have opened up with you, the viewer, a 4-part series on the neuroscience of memory and learning. So now that we know how to design our study sessions, the next thing to consider is what state of mind we are going to be in when we are actually studying. And is there an optimal state that we can be in that maximizes our productivity? Well, actually there is, and that's what we're going to explore in the next section. Have you ever felt that moment where time just disappears while you're busy with an activity? The moment where you are so immersed in the task at hand that hours fly by, the world disappears, and you feel like you could go on forever. This is actually a state that is built within all of our brains, and it's called the state of flow. Flow is often described as being in the zone. It's the state where productivity meets pleasure. We've all had moments of flow in our life. Just picture that time you're reading a book and everything else disappears, or you're playing some sport and time disappears once again. You're so immersed and focused on the task at hand, but you're also deeply enjoying that moment as well. But the beauty is that this mental sweet spot is not just a happy accident. It's a symphony orchestrated by our brains. So the big question then is, how do we all reach that state? And how do you induce that state at will? Well, for starters, you need to actually understand what the flow state in our brain actually is. We all have a part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. It's the CEO of our brain, if you will. But when we enter into a flow state, this prefrontal cortex goes on a mini vacation. And this process is called transient or temporary hypofrontality. When we are busy with an activity that enters into flow state, we experience transient hypofrontality, which is basically like putting your nagging boss on mute. But that's one part of the flow state. The second part of flow is that it is a chemical cocktail party that happens in your brain. For starters, dopamine, your brain's anticipation and reward neurotransmitter, boosts your focus and motivation during that task at hand. Secondly, our brain's natural painkillers called endorphins are flooded through our brain, creating the sense of euphoria while performing the task. And third, our brain is also flooded with serotonin, the emotional regulation hormone that keeps us calm, present, and content. So these three hormones work together to induce a state of flow, mixing motivation, a sense of euphoria, and a sense of calm presence, to create a state in which time disappears and we are totally immersed with the task at hand. So then how do you get an invite to this chemical cocktail party that happens in your brain? Well, basically all you need to do is to find those tasks in your life that are a sweet spot between being something that you are both good at, but that is also challenging enough. If an activity is too easy, then boredom kicks in too quickly. If an activity is way too challenging, then we become overwhelmed and anxious. So then picture a graph. And on that graph, picture an activity that is extremely easy. What happens is we engage in that activity, but we soon get too bored. And on the flip side, imagine an activity that we engage in that quickly becomes far too challenging for our skill set. We quickly become overwhelmed and we cannot continue further. So the key to entering into a flow state is to engage or allow yourself an environment that will naturally engage in activities that are both just challenging enough and just at the brink of our own skill sets. It's about engaging in activities that you are both good at, but that also pushes your boundaries just enough that you can handle it. And that's when you enter into that beautiful magical state of flow. The magic happens when a task is challenging enough to keep us engaged within the bounds of our own skill set. It's like tuning a guitar string to the perfect pitch, not too tight, but not too loose, just to get the right note that you want to hit. So in this balanced state, our skills stretch just enough to meet the challenge at hand, and it turns mundane tasks into something far more exciting. And when you understand this, you will realize that flow is a dance between challenge and skill. A neurological party that basically turns work into play and something that you can apply today to all the activities that you have to do, and something that you can use to turn those activities into gamified experiences of leveling up and challenging yourself every day. But remember, when you challenge yourself to enter into that flow state, don't make it too challenging at the beginning. Step by step, is the best way to get there. So now that we know just how to get into that flow state, the next thing to consider is just how good we'll become at converting our short-term memory into remembering things for the long term and hopefully permanently. So how good are you at remembering lists of items? Here's a list of about 7 items, and let's see if you can remember them later on in this video. Banana, umbrella, clock, skateboard, telescope, elephant, and coffee cup. So when it comes to learning about lists and how to remember them, one of the key things to remember is Miller's law of short-term memory. So this guy, George Miller, was a cognitive psychologist, and he proposed that our short-term or working memory is only able to handle about 7 or so items plus or minus 1 or 2 on either side. In other words, the average human being can only remember about 5 to about 9 items at a given time. And that's actually precisely the reason why phone numbers all over the world are usually between 7 to 9 digits. But before I carry on, how about taking a moment to pause the video and thinking about how many of those 7 objects you can remember? So how well did you do in remembering those 7 items? If you were able to remember all 7, well, then perhaps this isn't the video for you. But if you did struggle, I'm going to show you 1 or 2 things that you can use to boost your short-term memory. And towards the end of the video, I'll show you a much more powerful technique. So the first technique is pretty self-explanatory, and it's the technique of chunking or grouping. And it's something that our brain automatically does, but it's also something that you can get better at. It's basically about recognizing the pattern between seemingly unrelated objects. So for example, in the 7 items that we listed, we could perhaps chunk them into items that are indoors versus items that are outdoors. The indoor items being banana, clock, and coffee cup, and the outdoor items being umbrella, skateboard, telescope, and of course, elephant. But if you really wanted to take your short-term memory and learning of lists to the next level, well, that's when you bring in the power of storytelling. Picture this. One cloudy afternoon, Joe decides to take his skateboard and go for a skate in the park. He decides to take his umbrella with because he can see dark, storming clouds on the way. Umbrella in hand, he decides to skate down the street, but soon hears a loud explosion. He stops skating and quickly goes over to the house from which the loud explosion comes from. He realizes this is the house of the mad scientist that lives down the road and manages to climb the wall and peek inside. What he sees is the mad scientist sitting with a cup of coffee that looks half the size of his body and peering through a telescope twice the size of his body. And next to him is the mad scientist's pet elephant who's eating a bunch of bananas while telling the time on a ginormous clock. At this very moment, the rain starts to fall and Joe quickly clambers away from the wall trying to get away. And it's at this moment that both the mad scientist and the elephant both turn to look at Joe. That's the end of the story, and while it might seem a bit nonsensical or a bit bizarre, the more bizarre and weird your story can be, the more likely you can try and link these seemingly unrelated objects into one coherent yet bizarre story. And perhaps thinking about the story might have already gone a long way in helping you remember all those seemingly unrelated 7 objects. And it's this technique and similar techniques like the techniques of memory palaces that worldwide memory champions use that drastically skyrocket your memory abilities. The vivid and unusual elements like a time-telling elephant and a mad scientist with a ginormous telescope and a ginormous cup of coffee goes a long way in helping you remember seemingly unrelated objects. And it's one of the greatest ways to beat Miller's law and drastically boost your short-term memory. One of the great things about it is that it can make seemingly mundane objects and tasks a bit more exciting and a bit more enjoyable and perhaps a bit more bizarre. But in the process, it also drastically improves the neural connections in your brain and helps you to solidify a much stronger memory. Remember, memorizing and remembering is a skill. It's not an inborn talent. And using these kind of techniques can help you master such a skill. But all of these techniques are most useful when they are done at the right time. And when is that exact right time? Well, I explore that in this very video. I'll see you there.